Taking off the boards. Here comes Barkov. Breaking in. Barkov in there. What a goal by Barkov!
Welcome to Project Panthers, a weekly podcast discussing your Florida Panthers. Now, here's your host, Brunswick.
What a week. I am your host, Brunswick. The show, it's Project Panthers, and oh, baby, what an offseason it's been as we gear up for the start of the Florida Panthers 2022-23 NHL season. Here we go again. I am your host, Brunswick, and if you're hearing the sound of my voice, that means you found me on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any other major podcast platform out there on the World Wide Web by searching Project Panthers. Remember to follow us on all socials by also searching Project Panthers. Keep the interactions coming. I love discussing the Cats online. Honestly, the main goal of this podcast has always been to increase the Panthers' presence online, so just keep it up. I love it, all of it. Now, since the big Tkachuk-Huberdeau trade way back in the middle of summer, the Cats have been pretty quiet on the transactions front, as most teams are during the August and September months. Training camp has come and gone. Preseason is now over. Cats finished it with a record of 2-4-0. Scored 14 goals in those 6 games, but gave up 23. I mean, the preseason is a preseason. You can't really put a lot of stock into it. A lot of teams and their coaches, they're trying to figure out the bottom half of their lineups, and they're also getting their core players back into game shape. There's a lot of movement. There's a lot of jumbling lines and figuring out who's ready to play in the NHL that year and who isn't. We did get to see some of the new faces that Zito brought in, though. Unfortunately, star forward Matthew Tkachuk, he was only available for 2 games. He's battling some minor injuries throughout training camp. He did go pointless in those 2 games. A couple of notes from the preseason, just from watching the games online myself. I liked Alexei Heponiemi's game. He had a couple of tough games to start the preseason on the in the bottom 6. Didn't really perform the way I'm sure he wanted to, but for the last couple of games, Maurice put Heponiemi up on the top line with Alexander Barkov, and he did net a couple of goals in those games, so he didn't look out of place either. You know, he was working in the corners, playing physical. He doesn't have a lot of size, but he didn't look out of place, so I really liked what I saw from him there. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough for him to lock down a roster spot with the Panthers, so he's going back down to Charlotte in the AHL. Rudolph Balcers, he also had 2 goals in 5 games. You can see the grit he brings in the game. He was throwing around the body a lot, had some hits. Again, he's one of the players that a lot of people are hoping and maybe even expecting to break out this year. It seems that he might be getting a bigger role with the Panthers than he had in San Jose. Whether or not that sticks for a whole season, we'll see. But I'm sure he's going to be wanting to stay in the top 6 and get a real chance to break out with the Panthers. At Tulos Terinen, I think he's really improved a lot from last season. I found near the end of last season, he started to look really, really more comfortable offensively. I think defensively, he's been pretty solid since the 20 or 30 game mark of his career. But offensively, because of that defensive responsibility he takes, he hasn't really taken the risks offensively. But he looked a little bit more comfortable playing that offensive game. Scored a nice goal against Nashville in the very first preseason game for the Panthers. Maurice, he seems really high on Luosterainen. He said, he views him as a top 9 forward, and also said that if he needs to play on the wing to get there, so be it. And the team has been experimenting with Starboy on the 3rd line left wing spot, trying to get him those more minutes than playing on the 4th line. I think this is a good thing. Centers don't always translate to the wing, and I have criticized this team for having too many centers and not enough wingers. I like the addition of Balcers. I like the addition of White, both guys who can play wing. Luosterainen will also be a guy who can play wing if he can convert to the left wing spot. I think this is a positive move for him. Now, whether or not he can hold his own in the top 9 remains to be seen. Marchment was the guy who held that spot for the majority of the season when he wasn't injured. He put up amazing numbers playing with Lundell and Reinhart. It'll be White and Lundell likely with Luostarinen on that line, but again, they're going to be looking for big things from that line. Maybe not the similar offensive output, but defensively, they're going to have to be strong. I do like Starboy's outlook this season, though. I think there's a lot of potential for Etu going into this year. Everyone's favorite pest, Ryan Lomberg, he also scored a couple of goals in 5 games, so there's a few guys getting a couple of goals in 5 games. Over the course of the preseason, he was doing what he does best. I do think he's poised to take the next step this year. He's got some tools to score in the league. He's got the speed, deceptively decent shot. We'll see what he does this year. I'm really, really excited to see him take that next step. Likely slotted for the 4th line, but if Etu maybe struggles on that 3rd line left wing spot, maybe Lomberg leapfrogs him. Who knows? We will see. Couple of disappointing notes from the preseason. Grigory Denisenko, although battling some injuries during the preseason, he just looked very out of place in his 2 games. Didn't get a lot of ice time. Did register an assist, but unfortunately, it's starting to feel like the clock is ticking on Denisenko. High hopes for him as he was a 2nd-round draft pick. The World Junior pedigree with Russia. Came over to North America a few years ago and just hasn't been able to really put it together. He did start to look better near the end of the season. Last year in the AHL, putting a little bit better offensive numbers down the stretch, but again, it's a bit disappointing because Denisenko was a guy I was kind of looking forward to banking on in a way and being a sort of secondary offensive help for this team in the future. I don't know if that's going to happen anymore. I really don't. Matt Kierstead also, he had a really rough preseason. He played in 5 of the games. He was a -5. Unfortunately, he seems to have played his way out of a top 6 spot with the team for now on the defensive side of things. We will see, injuries and stuff like that happen, so he'll likely get into the lineup at some point throughout the year. But again, someone who I was hoping to see take the next step doesn't seem to be there just yet. Eric Stahl also apparently he did enough to earn a contract, but due to cap reasons and limited roster space, the Panthers unfortunately unable to give him a deal to start the season. He did go pointless in 4 preseason games, but the Panthers are not signing Stahl to be a point guy. They're signing him to be a depth defensive role, 4th line guy, much like Joe Thornton was. Hopefully a little bit more effective than Joe Thornton was. Now, whether or not the Panthers have some sort of verbal agreement with Stahl in his camp that they'll sign him once, an injury happens, or I don't know, whatever happens to open up a roster spot or cap space. If they do, then maybe Stahl will wait, but I wonder if Stahl will field calls from other teams, if there are other teams interested, and whether or not he'll go. Remains to be seen, but I wouldn't mind seeing Stahl, just that extra depth and experience in the locker room. I think it's invaluable. Those are the kind of intangible things that a veteran player like Eric Stahl can bring to the team. Both keepers in the preseason, they seemed a bit rusty. Spencer Knight, he coming off fresh off of the signing that 3-year, $13.5 million deal with the Cats. I gave my take on Twitter when this deal happened, but I do personally like the contract, even though I know the risks that come with signing a young goalie. It can be a really turbulent position, especially in the early stages of one's career. We've seen the documented struggles of Carter Hart in Philadelphia with consistency. He's not the only young goaltender out there who has had those sort of issues to start their NHL career. Now, Knight has a lot of pedigree, that college experience, those incredible numbers he put up in college. I do think that he is the future of this franchise in terms of goaltending. And I think what Zito wanted was some clarity going into the season with Knight. And now he has a solid number to work around for, 3 years. Instead of having to question, or instead of having, more questions going into a massive offseason next year, he now knows, okay, Knight has a $4.5 million cap hit. That is said and done. I don't have to worry about that. So it's peace of mind for Zito. I think the price is fair. Maybe it doesn't look like that right now, but if you look at Spencer Knight's season last year, and I tweeted about this as well just recently, it was really a tale of two seasons for Spencer Knight last year, because the first half of his season was below 900 save percentage, above 3 goals against average, just not really performing the way he did when he first came onto the scene. But, he worked on his game. The goalie alliance and the goalie excellence team that the Panthers have going down there, they instilled a plan to put Spencer Knight on the ice as much as possible. He got a lot of starts in Charlotte last year, and I guess the reps really paid off, because in the second half of the season, he went 12-4-1, had a .923 save percentage with 2 shutouts, 2.18 goals against average. All those stats would put him in the top 3 for NHL goaltenders in the regular season if he were to have, let's say, 50, 60 starts. So if he can be consistent with those numbers, that deal is fantastic. Obviously, spending $14.5 million on goaltending over the next couple of seasons is not ideal. It pains me to say that out loud, to be totally honest. But it is what it is. The transition will have to happen as Bobrovsky goes to the twilight of his career and Spencer Knight starts to ramp up his career. I think Zito will eventually work some magic with Bob, and I think Bob will be reasonable and see the writing on the wall. How that will play out remains to be seen. We will see. That's a long ways away, at least. We have other things to worry about until then. Like the way these 2 guys performed in the preseason. They looked a little rusty. I got to say, they both had the GAA above 3.5, save percentage below 900. I don't know. How much of this was goaltending? How much of this was defense? The age-old question for us Panthers fans, it seems. The Cats also did make a roster move. They claimed Josh Mahura off of waivers from the Anaheim Ducks. Mahura is an offensive-minded defenseman who struggled to cement himself into a below-average defensive group in Anaheim. Perhaps Zito sees another reclamation project a la Forsling in Mahura. But to be honest, I am not holding my breath. I've seen a lot of chatter about Mahura being a guy like Forsling, but, the Forsling thing is not a common occurrence. We have been particularly spoiled as Panthers fans over the last couple of seasons with guys kind of becoming the breakout players that they have always expected to be while in a Panthers jersey. We saw it with Duclair. We saw it with Verhaeghe. We saw it with Forsling. List goes on. But that's not always that common. We have a new coach. There's a different strategy instilled. There is a different environment in the locker room. There can't not be a different environment in the locker room with the new coach. It's just what happens. Different coaches run things a different way. Now, Paul Maurice seems to be a player's coach in a lot of ways. So whatever, mojo the Panthers have had going, that sort of, seems to be the kind of thing where they bring players in and they are brought into the group and become part of the group, and whatever that roster does to make them feel positive about themselves and turn their careers around, like Sam Bennett, like Duclair, that is an intangible that I think they will hold on to going into this season, because it wasn't just coaching. I think if Maurice allows the players to keep that attitude going forward, then, it will be there this season as well. That may change, though. Tkachuk is now in the locker room. No more Huberdeau, no more Uyghur. This is going to be a slightly different team, no matter what. We'll see. But I don't hold my breath for Colin White to score 30 goals this year and Mahura to suddenly log 20 minutes and put up 40 points. We have to be reasonable here, We have to be, because it's not a a given that these guys are just going to come in and have career years again. We have to be. Opening night is Thursday against the Islanders on the road. A little breakdown of the lines as they seem to be shaping up to start the year. The first line is going to be Carter Verhaeghe, Alexander Barkov, and Sam Reinhart. We saw a bit of this line last year. Very dynamic, a ton of high-end skill on this line. Both Cardi V and Reinhart are shoot-first guys. They want to put pucks in the net. That's a good complimentary thing for a guy like Barkov who likes to give the puck to guys who like to put it in the net. The only concern I would have about this line, I would say, is the grit factor, I think. If teams put their best checkers against them, they might struggle. They're not the most physical trio and not the most physical top line in hockey. Very, very, very talented, but not that physical. If a team is giving them trouble with their third line that is known to, cause a ruckus in their own zone, it could cause problems for this line. It'll be interesting to see how long they stay together and if Maurice rolls these guys out a ton, because he does like to ride his horses into battle a ton. So they may be all getting 20 minutes, 21 minutes of ice time throughout the game. Second line right now, as it stands, looks like Matthew Tkachuk, Sam Bennett, and newcomer Rudolph Balcers from the San Jose Sharks. Now, this is a line that really gets my heart pumping. I get, super excited. This is three guys that all play in the corners. They got a real edge to their game. They are gritty shit disturbers, for lack of a better term. That's what they are. Bennett and Balcers specifically, they love to throw their bodies around. A little too much sometimes, maybe. But, Balcers, he seems like he's getting a fair chance to play with some offensively gifted players. Another potential breakout is there. I've seen the chatter about him. We will see. I think he's a prime candidate for it this year. I think they're going to be a really tough line to play against. They got really good amount of skill, grit, determination, edge. Like they're yapping to you the entire time on the ice. As a player that can get to you really easily, as someone who does that a lot on the ice, that can really get to you. Trust me, I know. But as long as they're disciplined, I think they could be a real menace out there. Now, discipline is going to be a key factor for this line. We all know Sam Bennett struggles with that. Balcers, not the most friendly guy when it comes to not getting penalties. We'll see how long Balcers can hang in the top six. I'm excited to see this line get out there and do some damage. The third line, as mentioned before, Tulos Terinen, shaping up to be that third line left wing. Anton Lundell and another newcomer, Colin White, who I think still needs to be in the league at least a few more seasons before I start thinking him as Colin White, the forward, instead of Colin White, the big bruising defenseman from the New Jersey Devils who played for like 12 years back in the early 2000s. I can't help but see Colin White and his big bald head every time I read Colin White, center/right wing for the Florida Panthers. It's just, it's the old hockey guy in me, I guess. I'm sorry. I'm an old guy. But these guys are more of a pseudo sort of second line. There's a lot of skill, but not a lot of toughness or grit. I think, Starboy and Lundell, they're both very responsible defensively, so that could open up things for White, who brings a good balance of offense and playmaking to that wing. I don't see them being as successful as the previous third line. Marchment, Lundell, and Reinhart last season when they were together, they were absolutely dynamite. Not expecting that from this group. I do worry a little bit about the line mates for Lundell as well. Might be primed for a sophomore slump this year. It's not the same caliber of offensive skill he's playing with. Now, Lundell is a very, very good player, and he's so good that he does make the players around him better. So even with that said, I don't think he'll have a sophomore slump, but if he doesn't hit the same point total this year or is not at the same pace, it would not surprise me. It would not. Fourth line, right now it's Ryan Lomberg, Nick Cousins, Patrick Hornquist. It's a $7 million fourth line. But in all fairness, $5.3 million of that is spent on Patrick Hornquist. What can I say about this line? I mean, this could be one of the better fourth lines in the league, all things considered. They are going to cause a menace, just like that second line. Seems like these forwards are going to be a lot harder, a lot more annoying to play against this season. How that will translate to the box score will remain to be seen, but I tell you, it's going to be fun watching these guys kick some ass on the ice night in and night out. Now on to the defensive pairings. This is something I am, fortunately, much less excited about going into the season. A lot of you out there seem to be pretty confident about this defensive group. Unfortunately, I cannot share that same sentiment right now. I wish I could. But right now, the realist in me, the logic in me just can't do it. First pairing, Forsling and Ekblad. This one is a no-brainer. These are your two best defensemen that you have. At times, Forsling was the team's best all-around defenseman, and I'm excited to see him in a top-line role. I do strongly believe that he is good enough to be there. I don't think that he is a flash in the pan. I think that he is the real deal, and we're going to find that out this season. Ekblad, I think he's poised to have a career year offensively just like he was last year. I'm expecting 20 goals. He's going to get a lot of power play time, maybe even flirting with 25 by the time April rolls around. Not out of the realm of possibilities for Ek, in my opinion. Second pairing, right now it seems like it's Josh Mahura, newcomer, and Radko Gudas, Butcher. The bottom two pairings have been jumbled around a little bit throughout the preseason, and I think that that's going to continue to happen until Maurice finds something that he's actually happy with. But as it stands, we have the offensive-minded Mahura and defensive-first guy Gudas as a second pairing. Again, this is where the team could really start to feel the loss of Mackenzie Weegar. He ate a lot of minutes, and where Forsling would be slotted on the second pairing with Gudas is now Mahura or Mark Stahl or maybe Brandon Montour, which nothing against any of those guys, but I just don't think that they are at the same level as Gustav Forsling or a Mackenzie Weegar, despite all those mistakes he did make. Third pairing is Mark Stahl and Brandon Montour, a similar styled pairing. Bigger, slower defensive guy paired with an offensive first guy. That's decent on paper. I could see these two moving up to the second pairing if they find some chemistry. You know, Mark Stahl has proven he can still kind of hang around in this league despite his size and you know, lack of swiftness on the ice. And Montour's role seems to be expanding. He's being included on the power play one as the trigger man. And Maurice may want to see him more engaged in the game at full strength, so he may give him those second line minutes. The odd man out right now, as it stands, as mentioned earlier, Alexei Niemi. He's Alexei Heponiemi. Just Niemi. Just Niemi, the old goalie for the Blackhawks, right? Is Heponiemi being sent down to the AHL. He surprisingly cleared waivers despite my fear of him being exposed. I guess I overvalued him. As per usual, Lucas Carlson, who was also exposed at the end of training camp to the waiver wire, he cleared. Looks like he's going to be the seventh defenseman for the team. I do expect him to get some gameplay this year with the questions surrounding the blue line, as well as injuries that will inevitably happen. I could see Maurice just kind of throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks with this defensive group. I really could. I am concerned about it. I can't lie. Defense was a struggle for this team for previous years, even before Coach Q came around. He didn't exactly come and fix it on day one or right away. You know, when teams tightened up in the playoffs last season, we saw it against Washington. We really saw it against Tampa Bay. The Panthers struggled. They struggled playing that defensive style. And although on paper they looked pretty good against Tampa with their chances and their shots, that tighter gameplay just kind of constricted them and didn't allow them to have that free room and space that they require to play their game. And, you know, if they continue to be just ineffective defensively, it's going to be a long season. I do think they have the talent to make the playoffs. I'm not particularly concerned. I do see this season as a transition season. I unfortunately don't see this group, this defensive group, good enough to get them past the second round, maybe even not past the first round. We'll see. But the next offseason will be huge for Zito. He's going to have a ton of cap space. Regardless, we have to play this season. And, missing the playoffs, which, anything can happen, right? Missing the playoffs this year is disaster scenario. If a big injury happens off the bat, or if the team just starts out really slow, it could be tough to get back. And I don't know. And I worry that if the Panthers are struggling to keep pucks out of their net, people will fall back on the classic blame of the goaltenders. They'll look at Bob's numbers and, he's making $10 million and he's playing like crap, but it didn't matter who was in net before, and it might not matter this season. The other concern is during Spencer Knight's development, is that something that you want to expose him to? The real X factor will be Paul Maurice's coaching. We don't really know what to expect. History has not been kind to him in terms of strategies and what I've heard from Jets fans and previous fans or fans of the Canes and his previous teams. It's a bit difficult to be optimistic about his coaching style. I'm hoping he's learned a lot from his time in Winnipeg. I really, really am. But that, I think, will be the real determining factor of how this team does this year and whether or not they reach the heights that they have over the last couple of seasons. I think a President's Trophy is damn near impossible, and I'm okay with that. I don't want a President's Trophy. I would love a build on last season. If they can make it back to the second round and maybe win a game, or maybe even win the second round, that would be, I think, a good all-around success this season. But you don't want to start being that team that loses in the first round or second round every year, right? We don't want to be the Leafs of the second round. With all that said, listen, they got to play the games to know how this is all going to play out. You got to play to win the game. And with that first game, well, it's coming against the good old New York Islanders. God, I hate the Islanders. I really just do. I don't even care about the Trocheck was tripped stuff. I'm over that. I just hate the Islanders. It's Thursday night. I'll be watching ahead of my beer league hockey game, which, by the way, Hartford Whale Tails, we won our championship game 5-3 in the summer league. I scored a goal in that one. Not bad. Felt pretty good. It was a high moment. I know you guys are all dying to know about my beer league team. But I'm so excited for the start of the season. Panthers hockey is finally back. Summer is over, unfortunately, but hockey's here. I am your host, Brunswick. Remember to follow us on socials by searching Project Panthers. Keep those tweets coming. Whether happy or angry, I welcome them all. Go Cats, go. Have a week.